The great author and lecturer Maya Angelou once said, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." No, it's true. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. And as someone who's incredibly precise with her language, it's important to note that Angelou did not say, when someone tells you who they are, believe them. She was talking about paying attention to people's actions. People say all sorts of things, supportive things, even liberative things, but their actions show you the truth. And this is something we all know in our bones because we've all paid the price of not believing someone the first time they showed us who they are. But sometimes that's the only way to learn. Still, you know people by what they do, not by what they say. And this is true even for yourself. So if we take this idea seriously, then it's worth asking, what do our behaviors show us? What patterns can we identify? Or really, I like this word better, what are we rehearsing? I really like that word because it makes it more personal, right? When we ask, what are we rehearsing? Because this is more than just a pattern of behaviors. It is a rehearsal for our future self. What you rehearse becomes who you are. So in August, several of us read the book A Man Called Ove by the Swedish author Fredrik Backman, because I like to use novels as the guiding text for churches. We don't really have a book, so I like to use novels. Because I think fiction, good fiction, has the ability to help us see the truth about our relationships, our situations, our lives, because it shows us behavior instead of telling us about it. So in this book, there's a man called Ove who is rehearsing his own death. After his wife died, he decided there wasn't anything left that was worth living for, so he tries to hang himself, and then the hook breaks, and then a neighbor backs into his house, and so he has to go out and park their trailer for them because they're so stupid, they don't know how to park a trailer. And then he tries to use carbon monoxide in his garage. But then a neighbor frantically comes up and knocks on the garage because they need a ride to the hospital. And then he tries to step in front of a train, only to end up rescuing another man who falls on the track, which inadvertently makes him a hero, much to his disgust. So every single suicide attempt is interrupted by somebody asking Ove for help. And this frustrates Ove because he doesn't want to help. He is an unpleasant, unhappy curmudgeon. And these people keep getting in the way of his plan, which is to die. But every single time he agrees to help, reluctantly, but nevertheless he agrees, and slowly something starts to shift. Ove is trying to die because he's convinced there is nothing meaningful left in life. But when he starts to help others, regardless of his willingness, his level of willingness, life starts coming back. And I believe that Bachman, the author, is inviting us to see not just ourselves in Ove, but our culture. And he's using the story of life appearing meaningless and suicide as the only option, as an opportunity for us to see the nihilism and the acedia and the sense of powerlessness in the face of Moloch that has gripped our culture and left so many of us wondering if any of this matters. And I think for Bachman, this isn't just a character. It's about a culture that's experiencing a meaning crisis. And this nihilism speaks to us in a very selfish voice. If there's no meaning at all, then, just go for you. Just get what you need. It's a dog-eat-dog world, and the only meaning that's out there is what you derive for yourself. And this selfish voice is killing us because we're all just going for self. And I want to be careful here because I don't think that suicide is selfish. I want to make that very clear, right? People who do end up committing suicide are in pain, and it's such a deep pain that it feels like that's the only solution. But what Bachman is saying, or what I think he's saying, is that this selfish voice that we are seeing in our culture, the one that is growing out of this sense of cultural nihilism, is leading us to a societal suicide. And those points are different, and I just want to be really clear about that. Ove isn't just a character in a book. He's a metaphor for that part of our culture that is increasingly reluctant to help, increasingly reluctant to participate, to engage, and gets resentful when we're forced to. Other people are not the key to our happiness, we think, right? They're a burden that we have to deal with. And there's this withholding that has overtaken us. And when that happens, it's as if our society is choosing death. Like if we're all invested in withholding, it's as if our society is choosing death. And we have many excuses, some of them quite good, justified, like our lives are very busy. Right? But collectively, we're not paying attention to what is happening to us because the progression is slow, and this culture of withholding is overtaking us because we are rehearsing it. We are rehearsing it. Withholding, this pattern of withholding, isn't neutral. It is a slow death, and we don't even realize we're doing it. And I don't want to confuse this with putting up boundaries. I think that boundaries are very important, right? Not everybody should have access to your time. Some people are unwell, and they will take everything, right? So boundaries are important, but sometimes we say that we're protecting our energy or we're engaging in self-care when what we're really doing is rehearsing isolation. We're just practicing withholding. And every time we do that, we're casting a vote for the kind of person that we're becoming. 43% of people over 50 in Canada are at risk of social isolation, and 59% experience loneliness. And a study out of the University of Montreal found that 68% of teens and young adults 18 to 34 report a lack of belonging. And this it's not just a study, like it has real-world consequences, real-life consequences. In 2010, a study by Julian Holt Lundstedt found that the absence of social connection carries a mortality risk comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The absence of social connection carries a mortality risk comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. You can smoke 10 cigarettes a day. If you're really social, you're doing better. Not, or maybe don't listen to that advice, okay? A 2015 meta-analysis of 3.4 million global participants found that among initially healthy people, loneliness was associated with a 26% increase in the risk of premature death, social isolation with a 29% increase, and living alone with a 32% increase. In the U.S. Surgeon General's 2004 advisory on loneliness and isolation confirmed that this mortality impact surpasses even the risks associated with obesity and physical inactivity. And this is happening to us and we're not paying attention. This is what our culture is rehearsing. And this is what I mean by a society that is suiciding itself without even realizing it. But let's unpack that word rehearse so we know what it means. When you try something new, your prefrontal cortex is running the show. That's the conscious effort part of your brain. You have to think about doing this thing, this new thing. You have to decide on it. You have to manage the discomfort of engaging in new behaviors. And calorically, right, it's very costly. Although what we usually say is that's exhausting. Right? But we're exhausted because it costs the body. Right? But that's why new behaviors feel so hard. You have to go through the whole process of thinking, deciding, managing, and that's why we're reluctant to change. Our body unconsciously is doing a cost-benefit analysis. Do I stay in something that isn't working, but I can do on autopilot, or do I engage in something new that is energy demanding and offers no promise of success? Well, we all know the answer, right? Because each of us is wrestling with things in our lives that we want to change, but we don't do anything about it because it feels too costly. And it costs us to shift behaviors. But if we take a new action and keep doing it and rehearse it, the behavior transfers from the prefrontal cortex to the basal ganglia, which is the autopilot part of our brains, the part that handles habits. And once it's there, it becomes automatic. It becomes who we are. Right? The first time you go running is hard. The second time you go running, it's still hard, but maybe a little bit easier. By the time you're running for 2 months, for a year, you're not someone who is trying to get up and go running. You're a runner, right? It's who you are. James Clear wrote, "Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become." And the question for us is, are we conscious about the votes we are making in our lives? Are we conscious about what is becoming automatic, about what we're rehearsing? Because it could be leading us towards death, or it could be leading us towards life. Like, we rehearse both. You don't become a generous person, you don't become generous by believing in generosity. Everyone believes in generosity. Everyone does. But if we were to take a little tally today in this room, our list of generous people, we'd probably put 4 people on there. And I'm saying that I wouldn't be one of them. I'm just saying we would, it's when you really see a generous person, it's a different thing, right? We become generous by rehearsing generous actions until your brain automates it. The word identity comes in part from the Latin identitum, meaning repeatedly. You are what you do repeatedly, not what you believe, not what you intend, not what you say, but what you rehearse becomes your identity. And this is what was happening to Ove. Every time that he reluctantly helped someone, he was casting a vote, not for death, but for life, not for isolation, but for connection. He didn't feel it at first. He was still grumpy. He was still a jerk. They made a movie, an American movie out of it. It was called A Man Called Otto, which had Tom Hanks in it. And I just couldn't get behind it because Tom Hanks is just too likable a person. When you read the book, Ove is not a pleasant person. He's a jerk. He was still convinced that life was meaningless, but his basal ganglia was recording a pattern. Help arrives. Life happens. Meaning emerges. And slowly the rehearsal started overriding the script that he'd been following. Now, unfortunately, though, we don't live in a book, right? We live in this culture, which is overwhelming and teeming with the selfish voice of nihilism. And there is no cosmic author dropping in nosy neighbors that need us, forcing us to level our character up against our will. And frankly, for us, it's often just easier to stay in the pattern that we've been rehearsing, the one where we protect our time and guard our energy and wait until we're ready to show up. And there's a reason nobody writes that book, because nobody wants to read a book about someone or a culture who increasingly descends into meaninglessness until they die. It's not a very inspiring book. And that's why novels are helpful, right? They're guides to show us the transformed life that we want to live. Because the hero always succeeds. or the hero doesn't, and it's a cautionary. So every time we rehearse a behavior, we're voting on the person we're becoming. Your basal ganglia is recording the pattern becomes our identity, and the question isn't whether we believe in showing up, the question is, who are we actually becoming? So our selfish minds have been making us a promise our whole lives. It says, protect yourself first, guard your energy, get stable, get healed, get rested, and then you can show up for others. It promises that happiness comes from taking care of yourself, and it's lying. It's lying. We do have to take care of ourselves, but the withholding doesn't have to be part of that. I'm not talking about changing the world. You could be going through a divorce right now, and life is spiraling out of control, and everything is telling you to conserve your energy. And I guarantee you that if you find a few moments each day to witness to someone else, it could just be the person who is serving you coffee, and you let them know that they are not alone in the world, it will help you feel more connected. This isn't about changing the world. This is about not withholding the gift that you have. Viktor Frankl, the author of A Man's Search for Meaning and a survivor of the Nazi Holocaust, said, happiness cannot be pursued. It must ensue. One must have a reason to be happy. He called it the paradox of hedonism. The more you chase happiness directly, the more it slips away. But when you pursue meaning, when you show up for something larger than yourself, happiness arrives as a byproduct. And now there are numerous studies that have proven this to be true. There was a 2020 longitudinal study of 13,000 people over the age of 50, and they found that those who volunteered more than 100 hours a year, or 2 hours a week, versus those who volunteered 0 hours a year, had a 44% reduced risk of mortality, a 17% reduced risk of physical functioning limitations, higher self-rated health, higher positive affect, optimism, and purpose in life. Our selfish mind promises that withholding will make us happy. The cells in our body know the truth. Withholding is death. Service is life. And this is what happened. This is what Ove discovered. Every time he reluctantly showed up, every time he helped people despite not wanting to, his body was recording a different pattern. Spiritual maturity is not just adding new beliefs or reading a new book or affirming generous values. It's about letting go of the patterns that we rehearse, the ones that are inviting us to be selfish. And I get that it's uncomfortable to say yes when you'd rather say no. I love to say no. I have a cup in my office. Some of you know this. And on it, there's a person dancing, and it says, no. It's one of my favorite phrases, no. Right? It's uncomfortable to serve when you think you're living with a deficit. But discomfort is the texture of becoming. Discomfort is the texture of becoming. And that's the choice, right? We can keep rehearsing withholding, telling ourselves it's self-care, or waiting till we're ready, or we can do what Ove did, reluctantly show up, grumble if you need to, but show up because the rehearsal is what's changing us, not our intentions, not our beliefs, our actions. And what happens when you rehearse showing up is that it transfers to the rest of your life. Your basal ganglia doesn't care where you practice. It's just recording a pattern. So if you rehearse generosity at church, it shows up when your kid's teacher asks for help. When you rehearse listening in a small group, it shows up when your aging parents need care. When you rehearse commitment anywhere, it shows up everywhere. The means are the ends. You have to be what you want to see. And in our culture, there is a rehearsing of isolation and withholding, and we need people who are willing to rehearse living. We need people who are willing to rehearse living. So in a moment, I'm going to ask you to turn to someone near you. You don't have to know them well. This is your first time. No, they're very good people. You don't have to know them well. They just have to be there. You're just having a short conversation. And you're going to answer one question. Where will you show up this week? Where will you show up this week? It doesn't have to be something big. Like, don't promise that you're going to get everyone in the province a doctor, right? Don't promise that. That's too much, right? Something manageable. Maybe there's something that you've been putting off and you're like, oh, I know where I have to show up, right? It could be here at the church. That would be great. We're trying to build a crew who shows up for each other, but it could be out in the world. You know, a neighbor who's struggling or a friend that's going through chemo. It doesn't have to be big. It really doesn't. I don't care if it's out there because it's going to show up back here at the church. That's how the basal ganglia works. What you rehearse anywhere becomes you everywhere. So we're going to talk for 2 minutes, 1 minute per person, or if you're 3, figure it out. And I'll let you know when it's time to switch. A minute in, I'll let you know. So turn to someone, name where you're going to show up. You have a card. If you want to write it down so you can remember your commitment for later, feel free, but you don't have to. All right. Why don't we come back together? All right, so congratulations, right? I didn't know that I was going to call my mother today, but turns out that I am. Now that's just something that I've said, right? I'm not there yet, right? I've named it out loud. My brain has recorded it, right? But now comes the rehearsal, and now comes the time to vote for yourself. So I am voting to be a son who cares about his mom. That's what my vote is today, right? So I'm going to call my mom this afternoon. And you're not just voting for yourself, right? You're voting for all of us. Because what happens to the world if 100 people choose to show up one extra time this week? What happens if this same 100 people choose to show up one extra time next week? Right? What happens when this same 100 people start to build the habit of showing up? Right? Could just be calls. These 100 people will personally be happier, but the net effect on our culture will be transformative. Because we're also making whoever is on the other end happier. Remember, what you practice here doesn't stay here, right? It's the opposite of that funny phrase. What you practice here doesn't stay here. It shows up when you visit your parents. It shows up at your kid's school. It shows up when your friend gets a diagnosis. We become what we rehearse. So if this is your first time visiting us, I hope that you'll come back, because this is the journey that we're on here, right? This is what we're doing together. We are a crew of people committed to helping the world mature spiritually. And sometimes when people are talking about building habits, they say things like, oh, you just got to fake it till you make it. And I cannot tell you how much I hate that phrase. I do, because we're not faking anything. We're not faking anything. There's nothing fraudulent about this. What we are is we are committed to maturing. Doesn't mean that we're all the way there yet, but we have a commitment to maturing. And it's okay that we're not all the way there. But when you have an idea, we have an idea of who we want to become. We want to be a generous people who care about justice and equality and safety and empathy and fun and joy and laughter. We want to be these people. So we become what we rehearse, not what we intend, not what we believe, what we rehearse. So let's commit to rehearsing this life of joy together. Amen.